Right. Are we ready? Yes? Yes. Okay. Can you keep everyone awake after the afternoon cup of tea? We're going to cover some slightly more complicated topics this afternoon, but I'm going to try and give you a few examples from some of my own projects so that you can hopefully understand how things work. To start with, just a reminder about the DNA kits that we can buy from the Guild, which Teresa has brought here this afternoon, £80 for a 37 marker kit, and you can also order them online from the website, so that's worth doing. It normally costs £100 to buy a kit from Family Tree DNA if you buy it out of the sale, so that's actually a very, very good price, and it's slightly under their normal sale price as well. Okay, the first thing I'm just going to run through is the different numbers of markers, just to recap on from what Maurice was saying earlier. The standard test now is 37 markers. If you're ordering a test, you can get test kits at 12 markers or 25 markers, but those give you far too many matches and are really not worth bothering with. The number of matches you actually get can vary considerably. I do have some people who just take a 12 marker test and don't have any matches at all. At the other extreme, I've got some people in my projects at 12 markers who have over 6,000 matches, and you just don't know before you test whether you're going to be someone with no matches or someone with hundreds of matches or thousands of matches. It just seems to be some people have more common signatures than others. So if you're within a surname project, you're usually trying to find matches with the same surname, and 37 markers is very good at finding matches with the same surname. It gets increasingly more difficult to interpret matches once you start getting back beyond about 1600. Once you get to that stage, you don't have the evidence of the family trees in most cases to back up the results, and the interpretation is therefore much, much more difficult. And another use of the DNA test is not just finding matches with the same surname. If you've got illegitimate lines, sometimes you will want to try and find matches with other surnames. So that's another very effective use, and that's something you probably will be doing within your surname projects. 37 markers is not so effective at finding matches with other surnames, and I would always recommend testing at least 67 markers if you're trying to find a match with other surnames, and I'll show you the reason why later. When you go up to 67 markers, that panel of markers from 38 to 67 is actually a very, very slow mutating panel of markers. So if you're trying to, sometimes you do find certain markers that act as branch defining markers. You won't find those very often in that 67 panel, but it's very good for confirming or for refining what we call the TMRCA, the time to the most recent common ancestor. You do have some exceptional cases where people can have large numbers of matches at 37 markers. The same problem also applies at 67 markers, and I'll show you an example of that later. The highest number I've come across so far is someone who has over 600 matches at 67 markers, which is just unbelievable. And if you are interested in pursuing learning more about deep ancestry and you want to do the SNP testing, if you've got a 67 marker result, that makes the process easier because you can predict the subclade or subbranch much easier from those slow mutating markers in that 67 panel. So if you are one of the unfortunate people with several hundred matches at 67 markers, then you almost have to go up to 111 markers. I found 111 markers useful within my particular surname project because I'm looking at a surname where the lines go right back to the 1100s and 1200s, and the more information we can have, the better. And in fact, you actually get some very good markers in that panel that help to, that are very, very branch specific. We've got some in a little sort of motif in our group where we seem to be the only ones with certain values at certain markers. I'm having trouble with Maurice's keyboard here. Let's get my own.
I have a question as well.
Right.
Jamie, what's the magic of 111 markers? Am I going to come to a meeting here in a year's time and be told that really you want 124 markers? Is it going to go up?
I will talk about that later. Right, this is an example of a different surname. I had someone join my project. He lived in Colombia, of all places. And his ancestor was a gold miner by the name of Sergio, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but the ancestor was supposedly of English origin, and one of the possible surnames was Brandon. And when I looked at his results, he actually matched a number of my cruise men at 12 markers. We have these 3 cruises showing up, exact matches, 12, 12. At 25 markers, we still have these 3 cruises showing up again, 25, 25. And then at 37 markers, one of the cruises disappeared. He's not in my project, so I can't actually look at his results. One of the cruises was matching him on 33 out of 37 markers, and the other one matching him on 32 out of 37. So with 37 markers, it was actually looking quite promising. Adding on 67 markers, he wasn't showing up in anyone's match list, and when I actually looked at the markers, only 55 of those 67 markers ended up matching. So that is what we call a false positive result, so it shows the benefit of actually going up to those extra markers. This is just an example from my own project of one particular branch where we've used 111 markers. Right. Yes, we have a very well documented line. The family were landed gentry, so there are lots of extra records available for them. They're recorded in the Herald's visitations. And we can take the tree back to this John Cruise, who was born about 1449. We know he had 2 wives. We've tested someone who's descended from the first wife and someone descended from the second wife. And this is really just to show you how the scores can vary with the different markers. And when the results first started to come through at 12 markers, we had 2 mismatches, and we were beginning to wonder that, if we'd got everything wrong and all our paperwork was completely out. And you can see that the tip score that we were talking about earlier there was only a 36% chance that they actually share a common ancestor. And then as the extra markers were added, we got up to 37 markers, so there were no additional mutations, and you can see we then ended up with a very, very high tip score, 99.85%. At 67 markers, there was just 1 extra mutation, and so the tip score just went up slightly. 111 markers, we had a few extra mutations appearing, but I think that's because you've got just that many more markers in there, and some of those are more faster mutating. So the score went down very, very slightly, but that, for a tree going back all that time, I think I was actually very, very happy to get a very, very high score. You can never ever get 100% certainty. So 99.91% is about as good as it ever gets. And that's well within, however many years the generation used, still well within the expected time frame. One thing I should say about these probabilities, when they talk about 99.91% of the time, what that effectively means is if you were to test 100 men, then 99.91% of the time those results would fall within that time frame, and the remaining 0.9% would fall outside that time frame. It doesn't mean that if someone falls outside the expected time frame that the results are wrong. That's just the way that the random roll of the dice works. Sometimes if you throw a dice you do get 6 sixes, it just happens very, very rarely. The other question I'm trying to answer within my own survey project, we have one branch of the family in Ireland, and we have the cruise branch in Devon and Cornwall. And the question is, are the 2 branches related? I've tested lots of cruise men in Ireland. Only one of them actually matches with the Devon signature, but it's not as conclusive as I would like it to be. At 12 markers it was looking very good, and then it completely dropped off once we got to 25 markers, we got to 37 markers, and then you can see at 111 markers it again drops down again. So you can see that there's a certain amount of ambiguity when you add in the extra markers. It doesn't always give you the answer that you were hoping for. We have talked about the 60% cut-off. I actually prefer to have something a bit higher than 60%. So I like a bit more degree of certainty. So we're exploring other options with this line, and we're using the SNP testing to try and help to refine, to give us more evidence before we can decide whether or not these 2 lines are related. But it's all looking pretty good, at least from the 111 markers.
Have you used rare marker values at all?
Yes, within the 111 marker panel, we've got a number of markers and also the 67 marker panel that at the moment seem to be specific to our surname. So I think that is another thing that is worth looking out for.
And how do they define rare in terms of rare marker values? Do you know?
Well, I do it by looking at the Haplogroup projects. And you can see within the Haplogroup project, when you see your results arranged within the Haplogroup project, it stands out a mile if you've got a 13 and everyone else in the project is a 14.
Debbie, can you have people from the same family now with the different haplogroups? I think they were always in the same haplogroup.
How do you mean?
Well, take for instance, Stuart's in a very rare haplogroup.
Right.
And all the people in his family, the 4 in his family group on DNA has all got that same rare haplogroup.
Well, they can still be in the same haplogroup, but not be related within a genealogical time frame.
No, I can appreciate
because
that.
You have to use you don't just use the haplogroup on its own. You use the markers as well, the STR markers. It's a combination of both.
But you wouldn't normally get 2 different haplogroups in the same.
If they were in different haplogroups, they would be on different Y lines altogether.
Yes, yeah, that's what I thought.
But I mean, they could still be the same paper trail family. They could just be an NPE or some event that's been concealed.
Yeah.
Okay, now I mentioned the problem of people having too many matches. I thought I'd just show you one example here, or 2 examples in fact, from my projects. Have any of you got a Nile of the 9 Hostages badge on any of your results, the people who've got projects? Or Western Atlantic modal haplotype? Okay, no? Well, if you do have one of those, you end up with sometimes with huge numbers of matches. The Nile of the 9 Hostages is an Irish line. Nile was some mythical, I don't know if he's mythical or real, but he was an Irish king who went on the rampage and had lots of children, and those children had lots of children. And he is thought to account for a large number of the Y chromosome signatures in Ireland, just sort of higher than normal amounts. It rises, I think it rises to something like, I'm not sure of the exact figure, like 7% or something on the west coast of Ireland. So if you have a match with this, what's called the Nile signature at 12 markers, you will get one of these badges appearing on the members page. And in this particular case, he has 3,000 odd matches showing up. He probably has very many more than that, because when you can actually choose not to receive notifications of 12 marker matches, and when you've got one of these signatures, you really don't want to be notified every week or every day that you've got another 12 marker match when you can do absolutely nothing with it. You can see that the Nile man, as you go up the scale, the number of matches does start to go down, but at 37 markers, we're still at 698 matches. And even going up to 67 markers, he's still got 679 matches. I've yet to hear of anyone else with more than that, but there probably are people who've got more than that number of matches in the database. And going up to 111 markers, he only has 3 matches left. And those are actually all quite distant ones, genetic distance of 7 to 10. So those are probably very, very distant matches going back, perhaps 600-700 years or more. But of course, the problem with the 111 markers is that not everyone is upgraded. So it's very difficult in that situation to know how many of those 67 marker matches are valid.
Debbie, upgrading, does that mean taking another test or just lobbing out a bit more money?
Well, you have to lob out a bit more money to take another test. Yes.
You don't have to take the test again?
You don't have to do this swab again, no, they can use your existing sample. The samples are stored for 25 years, so unless they run out of DNA or you end up doing a large number of tests, it's usually sufficient. Okay. It's the family finder test is the one that takes up a lot of DNA, the autosomal test. Now the other signature is what's called the Western Atlantic modal haplotype. These are both the R1b haplogroup. The R1b, the SNP, the Nile signature is M222. The Western Atlantic modal haplotype, it actually straddles a number of different R1b subclades, which makes it more difficult to interpret the results. But if you match on 12 markers, there are 4 different Western Atlantic modal haplotype signatures that generate this badge, and that will again usually result in large numbers of matches. He actually doesn't have that many matches at 12 markers. I have seen people with 6,000 or more matches at 12 markers. At 25 markers it goes up, and you can see at 37 markers he still has 80 matches. That's loads of different surnames. At 67 markers it goes down, but even at 111 markers he still has 19 matches, and that's a variety of different surnames as well. And when we went on to do the SNP testing, all his matches have done SNP testing and they all belong in this same L193 subclade. So in fact, this is actually a very difficult situation to interpret because the technology at the moment is not giving us the answers that we would like. We've gone to the maximum and it's not splitting down all those different surnames in that list of matches at 111 markers. But that is an extreme example. Right, I'm now going to cover, SNP testing, because if you are in a situation where you're trying to refine these matches and you want an extra tool, SNP testing is the way to go. Just a brief recap, the SNPs define the branches of the human family tree. They enable us to determine the haplogroups, the subhaplogroups, the clades and subclades. I'm never actually sure where the boundaries of all those different groups lie, but you'll see all those names come up. They are unique, usually unique events. It's a very, very slow mutation rate. So the SNPs allow us to determine it's a cumulative process, rather like the rings on a tree. So you can actually see the order in which the SNPs have occurred. And that enables you to reconstruct the tree and put the branches on the tree. So we use the SNPs for the branches, and we use the STRs for the leaves, or the very, very low-hanging branches of the tree. When you get your DNA result from family tree DNA, they give you a prediction of your haplogroup based on your 37 marker signature. They've now got 500,000 results in their database. They're usually pretty good at predicting the haplogroup. There are rare cases when they can't predict it, and they will then do a free SNP test to confirm that you are the haplogroup that they predicted. And the more STR markers that you do test, the easier it becomes to predict which particular sub-branch you belong to. So what we are starting to see now is at 37 markers, or sometimes even at 67 markers, people are getting false positive matches. They're getting coincidental matches. They could match on 34 out of 37 markers, but it turns out when you do the SNP testing that they're actually in different subclades, so they're effectively on different branches of the human family tree. And with DNA testing, the SNPs always trump the STRs, so if they're in different sub-branches, they are not related even if the STRs tell you that they are. This is probably going to be a difficult concept for people to gather because it effectively goes against everything you've been told. If you get a match on family tree DNA, it looks really exciting, 34 out of 37 markers, but you need to be aware that sometimes those matches are not valid.
You don't seem to write that clause in, do you?
No, well, I think it's something that you only start to discover as you go along, as the SNP testing has been done. And I'm going to show you an example now. Okay, this is one of the members of my project. When you're on the match list, you also get this, you will see the haplogroup. If someone's done the SNP testing, it will show the haplogroup and it will give the haplogroup name, and it will list the terminal SNP. Now this is someone's 37 marker match list, and 2 of the people, he's actually got rather a lot of matches. This is 69 matches, and one of his matches has had a SNP test done, he's U106, and another one has been SNP tested and he's U152. And those are 2 completely different branches of the R1b tree. So even though those are matches, we don't know which of those matches is valid unless he tests and finds out which branch of R1b he belongs to. But of course the problem is that these other people haven't done any SNP testing at all, so we don't know how many of those are false positives and how many aren't. If the match is with the same surname, the fact that you've got a 37 marker match is usually valid, but it's much more complicated if you're looking for a match with a different surname, and also if you're searching a very common surname like Smith, where you could easily have a match at random. These are my dad's SNP results, and just to show you how the process worked, when we started back in 2007, he was just predicted to be an R1B. R1B takes you back perhaps 4,000, it probably arose about 4,000 to 10,000 years ago. And as more SNP markers were discovered, we did extra testing, and you can see each time you add a new SNP, the age of that subclade goes down. And we're now down to Z12, and that probably arose something like 1400 to 1500 years ago. So you can see that as we add more SNPs, we're getting very, very close down to a genealogical time frame. And there are some SNPs that have been discovered now that only go back about 500 years. So you can have SNPs that will define branches of genealogical branches within your tree. So and the Irvings, in fact, have a SNP that's specific almost to their surname. And you can actually see from the SNP testing that people belong to the Irving clan. Right, this is a very complicated tree. This is the U106 tree that my dad belongs to. We're in good company here. We have James Watson and Craig Venter, the first two people to have their DNA sequenced. And this is my dad, right down the bottom here, Z12. And you can see the cumulative sequence of SNPs. We've only tested for Z12, Z8, L48 and U106, but we can infer by that he would also be positive for that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. Okay? But the fact that we're Z12, if we were to have a match with someone who had tested for Z15, we could still match on lots and lots of markers, but we are on different branches of the family tree. Now, SNP testing options, it's currently a slightly complicated process because you almost have to know what you're testing for to be able to order the SNPs. You can order SNPs a la carte from Family Tree DNA. They cost $39 a time, but you have to be able to know which SNP to order, and that's not something that the average project administrator is going to be able to do easily. So if that's something you want to pursue, you have to join the Haplogroup projects and get advice from the Haplogroup project administrators, because they are experts in their particular haplogroups and they're very, very good at predicting the SNPs. And I've quite often been able to just go straight and order a SNP for $39, which puts me on one of those very low-hanging branches of the family tree without having to order all the intervening SNPs to do that. But the number of SNPs is actually exploding. There were 2,000 in 2012. By the end of this year, there's probably going to be 3,000 to 4,000 SNPs available. Next year, I dread to think what number it's just going up exponentially, as we'll see later. You can, if you take the 23andMe test, which is it's a health test as well, it gives you information on health and traits. That does give you some SNP information. You can use that information once you've got the SNP information from that test, you can use that within the surname project. We have got some people doing what's called the Geno2 test from the Geographical project. That's rather expensive, it's £139, but that does give you over 12,000 SNPs. If you've got a big group of people all in one matching group, you only really need to test one person, so you could actually get lots of people to club together and just pay for one person to be tested, say with the Geno2 test, and then if they are all in a cluster together and you will know that their result then applies to the rest of the group. There's another company called Britain's DNA who also trade with Scotland's DNA and Ireland's DNA. They currently have a test that offers 15,000 SNPs, so it's actually slightly better than the Geno2 test at the moment. They have had some bad press because of their rather exaggerated claims in the press of rather ridiculous stories that they've produced, but the test itself is sound. The Geno2 test, they've hinted they may be introducing a new chip in 2014, so that will probably supersede the Britain's DNA test. The science is advancing at such a rate at the moment, it's actually very, very difficult to keep up. The cost of sequencing has suddenly dropped within the last few years. So I think the company's going to be playing a cat and mouse game. You'll find one company has a better offer 1 year, and then 6 months later someone else will come along and will supersede it. Family Tree DNA used to do a program called Walk Through the Y, which is now finished. That was used to discover new SNPs, and that, at the beginning of the year, that cost $950, £606, and that would actually sequence 500,000 bases within the Y chromosome, trying to find new SNPs or places on the Y chromosome where there were these little changes that helped to distinguish the family trees. No? I don't know what I'm doing wrong with this.
There you go.
Oh. No, it either does too much or... Right.
There you go.
Okay. Now this is probably not something that any of you are going to consider yourselves, but this is a taste of things to come. This new company, Full Genomes, was set up, I think they started doing the early testing in December last year. And you can now have full Y chromosome sequencing done. It would cost you, I've got the price there somewhere, $1,250. It's not, although it says full Y chromosome sequencing, it doesn't sequence the whole Y chromosome. There are almost 60 million bases in the full Y chromosome, but it has all these repetitive regions that none of the chips can get to, and no one has actually managed to sequence the whole Y chromosome as yet. So what it actually does is sequence about 20 million bases in the Y chromosome. And if you have this test, you will have results for 300 STRs, and you will also get a long list of SNPs, and it will give you private SNPs. So we're actually at this, with a test like this, it's reckoned that there's a new SNP in every 1.5 generations. So the SNPs will effectively be used to determine the branches within families. So a son and a grandfather, you probably would find that they would have one SNP difference. So you would then be able to follow that SNP trail and determine precisely all the different branches on your genealogical tree. Okay, this is just a summary of the full genomes testing. The first tests were done back in December last year. Ray Banks has pioneered it. He's the administrator of the Haplogroup projects for C, D and G. I believe it was only 10 samples that were done in the initial beta testing phase. It's now at the phase 3 pilot testing is now being done. 93 samples have been sent off to BGI in China, and those results are due by the 30th of September. And those are the haplogroups that we know have been represented in this testing so far. So you can expect an explosion of new SNPs in all of those haplogroups. They are now also experimenting with another lab in America, UCLA. And so far, the tests that have been done, they found 28,000 SNPs that have been reported. I think Morris gave us a figure of, was it 5,000 in his presentation? But the number is just going up, and it's just at a ridiculous level now. And you get a huge file, 14 gigabytes of data just for your Y chromosome. But this is not for the faint-hearted because it needs specialist interpretation, and they're using new technology to try and speed up the process. I saw some of the early results from Haplogroup G, and Ray Banks was struggling with a spreadsheet trying to make sense of all these results, and I think it was a full-time job for him for weeks and weeks at a time. Now, what we can expect, I don't have any inside knowledge, but I would have thought that if Family Tree DNA have got any sense, they are coming up with their own full Y chromosome sequencing product. I'm sure that's something we're probably going to see at some point in the future. When that's going to happen, I don't know. But I can imagine within a few years' time, everyone will be having a test like this. We'll probably all be getting reports for thousands of SNPs and 300, 400 STRs. Quite how we cope with the data, I don't know, but that's how it's going to go in the future. Right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects and help you can get from projects. If you do want to go to explore SNP testing, you really need to get involved with the Haplogroup projects. It's a good way of gathering all the results together, and also it helps to see your own surname project results within a Haplogroup project, because it helps to detect patterns within your own data. So if you've got any rare marker values, they will stand out within a Haplogroup project. Some of the administrators, they have spreadsheets of all the results and they highlight all the different family groupings in there. So that can be very helpful. They're very good at looking at the STR values to predict the subclades, so they can often zoom in on the what we call the terminal SNP, or the most downstream SNP, so you can just order one SNP for $39 without having to pay £100 or more on a more expensive test. And for each of the different projects, there's usually an associated mailing list, and quite often you'll find a Facebook group as well. So if you're interested in that deep ancestry aspect, it can be quite fun just to join those mailing lists and just speculate on what it's all about. In the ISOC wiki, you'll find a list of all the different Y-DNA haplogroup projects. Now, when you get a result for one of your project members, and you find out that they are Z12 or whatever, or RL21, it's actually quite difficult telling them what it means to be an L21 or a U106. And this is something that's actually still quite difficult, because there are a limited number of resources. There aren't that many papers published. The genetic genealogists are way ahead of the game. The scientific studies don't go anywhere near as much as into any much detail as we do within our projects. But there are a couple of resources that can help. The ISOG Y-SNP tree is the best place to look. That has a complete listing of all the known SNPs, but currently they only list 10% of the known SNPs, because there have been so many new ones discovered. And we've got one person maintaining a spreadsheet with about another 44,000 SNPs on it. You can go to Wikipedia and look at the haplogroup pages on Wikipedia. Upadia has some genetics pages which has distributions and frequencies of haplogroups. GeneBase is quite a nice resource. They don't have all the haplogroups covered, but they do have some quite nice tutorials there. They are a little bit out of date, but it does give you just a general idea of the main haplogroups. A lady called Jean Manco has written a nice new book called Ancestral Journeys, and she's got a nice website. And if you're haplogroup I, she's got a lot of resources for haplogroup I on her website. If you want to read the hard science, you can go to PubMed and just search for your haplogroup in there. And look at the papers. You'll find most of them are probably very out of date. They're still talking about M269, which is just the R1b. They probably won't mention there's no mention of MyZ12 in any of the scientific literature at the moment. But it will give you a broad feel for the academic studies that have been done. Sometimes the easiest way to find papers is to go to Google Scholar, because when you go to PubMed, it will take you to it quite often ends up in a paywall, and you have to pay $31 to access the paper. Sometimes you can find PDF versions online by looking on Google Scholar. Quite often a lot of the universities have, they'll put copies up on their own university websites. As well as the haplogroup projects, there are also geographical projects. I do a project for Devon, and that's just another way of comparing results. And within a geographical project, it's also a good way, if you've got people who want to take a DNA test, they don't want the bother of setting up a surname project, they can go and join a geographical project instead. And especially if you're investigating illegitimate lines, it can be a good way of doing that. I've got two people in my Devon project. They match on 37 markers, and one line we know was illegitimate, and they both had common ancestors from the same Devon parish, from Braunton. So you wouldn't really, that facilitates that sort of matching. And it's also a place where you can compare mitochondrial DNA results and family finder results. And if you're lucky, if you're in a geographical project, you can get advice from an experienced administrator.
Is it useful using mitochondrial DNA results in this regard? Do you find that the same area that has a particular Y DNA signature also has a very similar mitochondrial DNA signature?
I haven't got as many mitochondrial DNA results. At the moment, all I'm getting is a picture of the distribution of the haplogroups. I've got probably well over 100 Y DNA results, and probably only about, in fact, no, it's probably 150, 200 Y DNA results, but probably only about 50 mitochondrial DNA results. It's more difficult for people to find projects of mitochondrial DNA, and they don't look for the geographical projects. With the family finder, it's probably beyond the scope of the talk today, but within your gap pages, you do have a tool for a family finder matrix, and you can compare the family finder results within a project. It's quite slow to run it, but that will tell you which of your project members match each other. If you've got a large project, it takes some time. If you've only got a small number of people, then it's quite a useful tool. If you're looking for geographical projects, there is a list in the ISOG wiki, and it's quite interesting that a lot of the British projects are run by guild members. So we've got Joe Flood in Australia doing the Cornwall project, I'm doing the Devon project, John Crear is doing the Manx project. So in some ways it's a natural extension of your surname project. I started my Devon project because I was trying to explore some illegitimate lines, and I really wanted to get other surnames into the project so that I could explore the illegitimate line. I haven't found the match for that particular line, but I'm hoping that's something that will come in the future.